Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well, and check out products through there also. You can also email us at the email at the bottom of the screen and get any information through that means as well. We'll start off with a quick look at our warnings and advisories that we have out for the state. Starting on the west coast of the state, where we do have some coastal flood warnings, coastal flood advisories further to the south. We also have blizzard warnings along the coastline and some winter storm warnings for snow and strong winds all along the coastline here. Now the further south ones are going to expire this evening, some of them at 6 p.m. this evening, whereas as we move further up the coastline, expiring later and later, some as late as 6 a.m. on Wednesday. As we move up into the Brooks Range and areas further in the northeastern part of the state, we have winter weather advisories out for snow and blowing snow in those locations, and those will be lasting some overnight. Tonight will be expiring around midnight, and others will last into Wednesday morning. And then finally, we have the more southern winter weather advisories. These are going to be out for snow and freezing rain. These are going to be valid starting on Wednesday and then going into sometimes as late as Friday. So covering all of Thursday there for many of these winter weather advisories for snow and freezing rain. So a lot of activity going on in the northern part of the state. Please check our website, listen to your NOAA weather radio, or call our weather info line for any updates to those, as times could be getting changed as new information comes in. Then we'll look at our satellite to see somewhat of what's causing all this weather. We have one old system moving through the state, bringing a lot of snow to areas along the northern part of the state. This is also bringing some cloud cover and some precipitation, sometimes off in the Gulf, not quite making it to places in the Panhandle. Out west, we can see our next system coming in, main low pressure system out here by the western Aleutian Islands, with its front pushing in to the central part of the Bering Sea, draping down also through the central Aleutian Islands. So watch this one more time. We can see all the warm air coming in, and this is what's going to bring a lot of that warmer air that could change some of this snow over to rain or freezing rain, as this system pushes up further to the north and east and over much of the interior part of the state. So we can look now, and here is our surface feature of the main low out by the western Aleutian Islands, bringing up enough warm air from the south to bring in a transition to rain for much of the Aleutian Islands. But as we get closer to the Pribilof Islands, seeing colder conditions still up there, seeing some snow. And as we move out over mainland Alaska, we have high pressure extending out over the southern part of the state, keeping much of southwest Alaska and south central clear of precipitation. But further to the north, riding over this region, we are seeing in that westerly flow some snow and some areas of blowing snow, with some of the tighter grading up there, kicking up enough winds to blow that snow around. And then down in the Panhandle area, a little bit of precip off in the eastern part of the Gulf of Alaska, but not quite making it into much of the Panhandle area. For tonight, that high pressure is going to push further to the east, bringing areas of fog now for much of the Panhandle, near the Yakutat area and in the Cook Inlet area as well. But we are seeing that system from the Bering pushing in more over southwest Alaska, bringing up that warm air and transitioning over the cold air to be warm enough for rain for southwest Alaska. As we get more up the coastline, still cold enough for snow at this time for St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound area, and up the west coast to areas along the Arctic coastline. Still expecting to see some areas of fog develop overnight up there as well. And then out over the Bering Sea, we are going to have our main low pressure system slowly moving in, and that's going to bring a mixture of rain and snow to the western and central Aleutian Islands. For Wednesday, we do have our main low pushing up more towards northeastern Russia and bringing up some colder air to areas around St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula area. But if we notice as we get over the western parts of the interior, we are seeing that mixture of snow and freezing rain that's pushing into those western interior locations. It's spreading more to the north and east. However, further to the south, we are seeing more rain down there with that warmer air. And behind this system with the westerly flow, we're seeing rain, but as we get further off to the west, colder air is starting to transition that to a mixture of snow and rain. Out ahead of our system in the Brooks Range, we are still going to see some snow up there, and then areas of fog out over the Arctic coastline. South central Alaska will largely be missed, with much of the precip either off to the west of the Alaska Range or in the Alaska Range further to the north. Some snow showers in the Talkeetnas and out by Wrangell St. Elias as well. High pressure ridging dominating the southeastern part of the state, keeping the Panhandle void of precipitation on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, a weak low spinning up on an old boundary in the northeastern parts of the Gulf, bringing a mixture of rain and snow to the Panhandle, primarily snow, but right along the Gulf Coast, we'll see some areas of rain there. Southeast or south central Alaska, going to see some snow with this northwesterly flow pushing in behind this low. And then much of the state under this northwesterly flow in the interior up through the Brooks Range Arctic coastline, going to see some snow. And we are going to still see some areas of blowing snow as we get out by the Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound areas. But we do have some ridging kicking in over the eastern part of the Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, keeping precip off to the west with these systems moving into this area, bringing a mixture of rain and snow to the central and western Aleutian Islands. For our temps on Wednesday morning, starting with our lows out over the Aleutians, with all that warm air coming up from the south, temperatures only dropping down to the upper 30s. Bristol Bay area and the YK Delta area both in the upper 20s to right around 30. Up the Arctic or the west coast into the mid-20s there, and then dropping down into the teens along the Arctic coastline. Eastern parts of the interior are going to stay a little bit colder there, with a few locations dropping below zero, like Arctic Village dropping down to -10. South central in the teens primarily, and then along the Gulf coastline in the 20s, and then the mid-20s for the most part for the Panhandle. Highs Wednesday afternoon starting off in the Panhandle, mid-30s, and then up around 40 as we get along the Gulf coastline. For Yakutat, 35 degrees, and then south central Alaska, right around 32, getting just above freezing for many locations in south central. Warmer down by Kodiak, 43 degrees expected high there. Mid-20s for much of the interior, again colder off to the east and warmer off to the west as we have that warm air coming in from the south. Then along the Arctic coastline, primarily in the low to mid-20s for highs Wednesday afternoon. Norton Sound area just above freezing, and then in the upper 30s for the YK Delta area, Bristol Bay area, southern locations getting above 40 degrees, and then right around 40 for the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul getting up to 39 degrees. Lows for Thursday morning, staying out by the Aleutian Islands, getting right around freezing for the islands. And that's going to be true in the Bristol Bay area, where we're going to be right above freezing, but right below freezing in the YK Delta area. In the teens for the Seward Peninsula, and single digits all the way along the Arctic coastline. For much of the interior, mid-20s for western areas by Galena, but as we push further to the east, dropping down into the teens. Arctic Village, again, colder, -8 low for Thursday morning. And then dropping down into south central Alaska, primarily in the mid-20s, but a little bit colder as we get further to the north. Talkeetna there at 17 degrees, and 6 degrees low for Glen Allen on Thursday morning. Taking us down home, we're going to be 36, Kodiak 34 degrees. Into the Panhandle area, Yakutat dropping down to 29 degrees, and mid-20s for the most part. Ketchikan a little bit warmer there, 31 degrees, and Sitka at 34. Then highs for Thursday afternoon, staying in the Panhandle area, primarily in the mid-30s, up by Haines, 34 degrees, Juneau, 35. And then in south central Alaska, we are going to see temperatures in the more interior locations getting up into the mid-20s, Talkeetna getting up to 29 degrees. Along the Gulf Coast, however, right around 40 degrees, with Kodiak and Homer 41, with Cordova 37 degrees. Up in the interior, some of those warmer conditions sneaking in towards Fairbanks. Fairbanks expected to get up to around 29 degrees Thursday afternoon. But as we get further to the north into the Brooks Range, getting up into the lower 20s there, Arctic Village 12. And then along the Arctic coastline, getting up into the teens, warmest actually off to the east now at Kaktovik at 19 degrees. Kotzebue 26, other areas around the Kotzebue Sound a little bit colder into right around 20 degrees. Mid-20s to right around 30 for the Norton Sound areas. St. Lawrence Island and Gamble there at 27 degrees for a high Thursday afternoon. Into the YK Delta area, upper 20s to lower 30s. Mid-30s for the Bristol Bay area, with Dillingham at 35 degrees. And we're going to see temperatures getting just above 40 degrees for the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul getting up to 37 degrees. And we'll start the aviation in just a second.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For our aviation segment, we'll start off with some flying weather here on Wednesday morning. With that system moving in, we have a lot of MVFR and IFR conditions throughout the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, and starting to make its way further inland over the west part of the state. We do also have some MVFR, IFR conditions extending to especially the low-lying areas in the interior. Then out over the Panhandle, just a few areas in the southern part of the Panhandle, some MVFR and IFR down there. Wednesday afternoon, it's going to clear up in the Panhandle, should be VFR throughout the afternoon. But over mainland Alaska, with that system pushing further inland, we are expecting to see those MVFR and IFR conditions expand eastward across the state. However, out over the Bering Sea, some IFR, or MVFR conditions out there, but starting to see some VFR conditions way out to the west. Then on Thursday morning, expecting to see the MVFR and IFR conditions push further to the eastern part of mainland Alaska, extending out over much of the state. That's going to include the west coast as well. But way out west, we are going to see some clearing out over the central Bering, central Aleutians, but then some MVFR conditions sneaking back in over the western Aleutian Islands. And now on Thursday morning, expecting to see some MVFR conditions come back into the Panhandle as well. Thursday afternoon, much of the IFR conditions pushing off to the east, so we are expecting some of that to make its way down into the Panhandle area. But a lot of it's starting to move out of much of, especially the western part of mainland Alaska, but we are still seeing a lot of MVFR conditions throughout much of the mainland and some IFR conditions through central and eastern parts as well. Out over the Bering Sea, we are going to see some areas of VFR starting to make their way further towards the east, but out west going to still continue to see the MVFR conditions. For our passes, starting up North Anaktuvuk Pass, we'll start off MVFR, drop down to IFR, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill will both start off VFR, but drop down to marginal conditions, as well as Rainy Pass. Windy Pass also going to be VFR, dropping down to MVFR in the afternoon. Isabel Pass starting VFR, also dropping down to MVFR. However, Mentasta should remain VFR throughout the day. Tanita Pass going to be VFR, dropping down to marginal, and Portage should be VFR throughout the day on Wednesday. When we look at Chilkoot and White, and they should also be VFR for the day on Wednesday. For our freezing levels, we do have some warmer air coming up with this system, pushing in towards the southwest part of the state, also through much of the Gulf of Alaska as well. Out west, still a little bit colder out there. However, the surface freezing line going well into the northern parts of the Bering Sea. For our icing on Wednesday, we have quite a bit of icing further to the west, between 1,000 and 5,000 feet. Below 4,000 feet as we get over the Seward Peninsula area, and below 5,000 feet as we get up along the Arctic coastline. However, as we drop down to south central Alaska, a little bit lighter icing there, between 1,000 and 4,000 feet expected. That's going to extend down over the Bristol Bay area as well. Shouldn't see much icing over the Panhandle for Wednesday. Taking a look at our jet stream, main part of the jet coming in over the northern part of the state, westerly direction there, 125 knots. Up to 135 knots over the southeastern part of the state, but strongest portion of the jet coming in over the eastern part of the Bering Sea, 140 knots out of a south to southwest direction coming in over the western part of the state, and then south of the Aleutian Islands, a westerly component of the jet up to as high as 110 knots there. Down to 9,000 feet, we have primarily a west to southwest flow out over the Bering Sea. Strongest as we get closer to the Aleutian Islands, 30 to 40 knots out of that westerly direction there. And then getting even stronger as we get over towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, eastern part of the Bering, up to as high as 70 knots out of that southeasterly direction. Dropping down somewhat, but still pretty high over the southern part of the mainland, 45 to 50 knots over the southern mainland, down to 35 knots over the northern part of the state. And then just to the east of southeast Alaska, seeing speeds as high as 55 knots out of that northwesterly direction. Taking us to 3,000 feet, primarily westerly flow over much of mainland Alaska, a little bit more southwest over the state, more northwest over the Panhandle, with speeds as high as 25 to 30 knots there. Out over mainland Alaska, our strongest speeds are kind of through the interior section of the state, around 45 knots there, dropping down to 25 over south central part of the state, but up along the Arctic coastline, going to pick back up from the 25 knots over the Brooks Range, up to as high as 35 to 40 knots out of the westerly direction out over the Arctic coastline. Then taking a look out over the Bering Sea, weakest winds are up by the low pressure system, 20 to 35 knots there, getting as high as 60 knots closer towards the Aleutian Islands, and then right over the Aleutians, 25 to 45 knots out of the west. Most of our turbulence is going to be from the Aleutian Islands up through the west part of the state, below 4,000 feet over the Aleutians, 6,000 feet over mainland Alaska, and some turbulence over the Panhandle as well. We'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving the
cool.
water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
and there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
No, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is
Okay.
going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and
Okay.
you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down.
Okay.
And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami
Right.
or
okay.
something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology
Yes.
and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before.
Yep.
So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCOR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCOR, Alaska EPSCOR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation,
Yes,
so
sir.
more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the Marines. We'll start off with a quick look at our ice edge. We can see the main part of the ice edge over here in the northern part of the Bering Sea, and with the southerly flow that we have been seeing there, bringing a lot of warm air up, a lot of that ice is eroding and expected to continue to erode over the next few days. Meanwhile, in the Cook Inlet area, not a lot of change down there, should remain about the same. As we look at our main part of our marine forecast, starting off in the Panhandle, we do have in the inside waters up in the northern locations, northerly flow around 25 knots, becoming southeasterly as we get closer towards Petersburg, but as we drop down further to the south, back to northerly flow around 15 knots there. Out in the Gulf, we have primarily northerly flow around 25 knots, diminishing as we get further to the north and out of a westerly direction. Then on Thursday in the inside waters, primarily southerly flow now, strongest as we get further to the north. Gale force winds around 35 knots up there. Westerly flow out in the Gulf, 20 knots, getting as high as 25 knots further to the north. Out over the south central area, pretty light winds, 10 to 15 knots for most locations until we get closer towards the Barrens, around 20 knots there out of a southwesterly direction, seas around 5 to 6 feet. Then on Thursday, winds picking up, especially around the Barrens, westerly flow, 35 knots there. And as we get closer to the north, diminishing until we drop down Prince William Sound area, only around 10 knots. Northern part of Cook Inlet, 15 knots out of a westerly direction, picking up to around 30 knots in the southern portions of Cook Inlet. For the Alaska Peninsula and around Kodiak Island, primarily a south to southwest flow, 20 to 30 knots, strongest on the Bering side of the peninsula, and around 25 knots by Kodiak Island. Then on Thursday, a west to northwest flow, 25 to 30 knots for much of the locations. Seas highest on the Bering side of the peninsula, around 14 feet. On Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands, we have winds out of a south to southwest direction, 25 as we get by the eastern Aleutian Islands, picking up to around 40 to 45 knots as we get towards the central Aleutian Islands, and dropping down to around 35 knots out by the western Aleutians. Then on Thursday, flow becoming southerly around 30 knots for the western Aleutian Islands. Easterly flow 25 to 35 knots as we get by the central Aleutian Islands, and then becoming northwesterly by the eastern Aleutian Islands, 20 to 25 knots out there. Along the west coast of the state, primarily southerly flow with that southerly warm air coming up by the St. Lawrence Island area, Norton Sound area, 25 to 35 knots there, getting up to as high as 40 knots as we get by the Pribilof Islands. Then on Thursday, flow becoming westerly, 20 to 30 knots with the weakest winds now by the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline, primarily a southerly flow along the west coast, 20 to 25 knots for most locations, then getting up as high as 30 knots as we get to the eastern parts, Beaufort Sea area, westerly flow there. Then on Thursday, flow diminishing along the Arctic coastline, northwesterly flow 15 knots, picking up as we get along the west coast of the state down by the Kotzebue Sound area up to as high as 30 knots out of a northwesterly direction. Quick recap for the states, starting with tonight. We have our main system with the main low out by the western Aleutian Islands pushing up through the Bering Sea with its front now draping across southwest Alaska. It's bringing a lot of snow and areas of blowing snow, higher winds along the west coast. We have many advisories and warnings out for the west coast of the state through the interior and around the Brooks Range Arctic coastline. Please check the website, listen to NOAA Weather Radio, or call our weather info line for further details if you are in those locations. A lot of blowing snow and snow conditions along the west coast with some areas of coastal flooding as well, extending up along the west coast of the state up towards the Point Hope, Point Lay areas. For the interior locations, starting tomorrow and moving through Thursday and Friday, we are going to have snow and freezing rain potential. And we can see that as we move into our Wednesday time frame, that freezing rain and snow mixture behind our front as the front pushes further into the interior towards the Brooks Range. Areas of snow out ahead of that. We are seeing snow and blowing snow conditions for the Brooks Range that will last through much of the night. And then into Wednesday, we do have some areas of fog, especially in the morning hours along the coastline. Down in south central Alaska, however, we are going to see much of that stay in the mountains, Talkeetna Mountains, Wrangell, St. Elias areas, and further off to the southwest, seeing some of that warm air come in, bring some rain to those locations, but high pressure dominating the southeastern part of the state, keeping the area pretty void of precipitation. Then on Thursday, finally, some of that precip starts to make its way back to the Panhandle area, primarily snow, but along the coast, warm enough to see some rain. Much of mainland Alaska, northwesterly flow, going to see snow showers from the Bristol Bay area through south central, through the interior Brooks Range, and along the Arctic coastline with some areas of blowing snow around the Seward Peninsula. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.